The earth was shaking. You had things falling from the buildings. At that point, I was on the sidewalk and walked into the street where incoming traffic is. As soon as I reached that place to get away from falling debris, I feel myself completely sucked towards the street. I was thrown 2.5 meters. I was sucked like a vacuum.
Yeah, so if you would like to share a bit about your experience growing up here during the Civil War in Beirut and yeah, especially in this neighborhood.
Well, I was born and grew up here in Beirut and left in 1984 to the States. But before that, lived through the years of the war from 1976 through 84. And every single step has been a challenge to survive, a challenge to continue your education, to carry on your basic daily lives. For that, gave me a strong background on how to survive. And I think I'm not the only one. A lot of people here in Lebanon have. We talk about resilience, and every time I run into friends and neighbors and families, we're resilient, which is great. But this is human nature. So, as a physician who has been here in Lebanon through the last few years, the crisis that we had, losing all your money in the banks, shifting from a normal economy to a cash economy. This has been the most challenging, beside the fact that we went through one of the biggest and largest explosions.
Third biggest in the human history, I think.
Yes.
Human made.
Yep. And to me, having lived through all of that, then through Corona, really slammed us really hard in many, many ways. When you see your property totally destroyed, you don't have any means to pay for it, and you have to do it gradually and do some things yourself. This is what sets the course. You modify your plans. Normally something happens and breaks down. You have bank facilities that will help you pay for another item that you want to replace. In this case, we have no bank, no government. The Lebanese private citizen was left to his own devices by his own government and by the world. When the world goes around and starts dealing with the people who caused this explosion, rather than sanction them and prevent them from moving around, they gave them legitimacy, they gave them all the facilities that they could want and had lost.
Are you talking about the political elite?
I'm talking about the political elite that was given a lifeline. For us here, we had Macron, which was the highest visit after the explosion, when everybody was angry at these guys and could have taken them with their own bare hands. He comes in, gives them more of a legitimacy instead of standing with the common person that got hit, killed, maimed. And despite all this picture, you learn to survive. You find your ways. And you have to modify what you do without compromising what you can give. And this is the biggest challenge.
We are in Hamra here,
yes.
Has this neighborhood been partially destroyed by the
Yes.
blast?
The whole clinic here where you're sitting was completely destroyed. Especially this area of this clinic was mostly infected, which is the working area of my clinic. No glass. The whole balcony was destroyed. People have no idea that we could find ammonium nitrate here in this balcony behind you, which is seconds after the explosion. I came up. I was at the top of the street here next to my clinic. I was thrown 2.5 meters. I was sucked like a vacuum. Let me explain to you. This area here is about, if you take a string and measure the distance from the silos where the explosion ground zero is, we're almost around 1.5, 1.6 kilometers, which the most of the destruction happened around 2 kilometers. But with the fact that you have buildings and you have corridors between those buildings where air is channeled through, for the explosion to happen, it required a lot of oxygen. And just seconds before you heard the actual explosion, there were two things that happened. The first thing, there was a small sound that we heard, which was an ignition sound. Then the earth was shaking. We had things falling from the buildings. At that point, I was on the sidewalk and walked into the street where incoming traffic is. As soon as I just reached that place to get away from falling debris, I feel myself completely sucked towards the street, towards the sidewalk. I slammed into a glass door. Fortunately, that glass door opened. I broke it, but the glass that was there was made to sustain break-it. So the way it was designed with a sort of a gel compound in between the glass panels. So things didn't fall directly on me, which was fortunate. Otherwise, I would have cuts all over. I hit my shoulder. Then the big explosion happened, and I was able to run down into the building here. And then we heard a third explosion. This whole scenario took less than a minute. But things kept on falling down for a while from the buildings. Initially, we thought it was a local explosion, something around us. I checked on the building. I checked on the family. Fortunately, they were all safe. Our dog, who was at home here in this building, was quite traumatized by the fact that all the glass fell on her crate, and our main door to the apartment broke, was on the floor, so she ran away, and I was able to catch her. So she was definitely quite scared. So I came up here to the clinic to look at the front door, everything looked fine. I opened the door and there was smoke in here. I looked on the ground. We had some small pellets, I can show them to you, that were round beads that were sort of on fire. They were red. I basically went back home, put our dog up, and then went down to the ER. The ER was completely dusty and debris had fallen inside. Fortunately, at that point, we still did not have any casualties. It took a good 2 hours before casualties started rolling in. After checking in the ER, I went to check on my parents, and they had a lot of damage in their building.
Just to clarify, did you go to the ER for your shoulder or for checking?
No, to check if they needed any help.
Yeah.
No, fortunately, my shoulder was just a little painful, but I could move. Then went up to check on my parents, and the house, all the glass was gone. Fortunately, no one was hurt. My dad, who is a plastic surgeon, but was not in the best of health, I looked at him, I said, I'm gonna help clean up the glass here. He said, no, leave everything, go to your clinic, get it all cleaned up, because there's a lot of people that are calling me.
Yeah.
And in fact, they were calling him and they were calling me. So I came back to the clinic. My wife and I completely cleaned it up with the help of a few people that came in. By then, we had loads of patients. And makeshift operating room, ER / getting people attended to, because a lot of the people that were not able to make it to the ER to have their wounds sutured came and walked in here. So we worked till about 3:30 in the morning. And then the next day did the same. Unfortunately, the next day my dad passed away. The dilemma back then was, where do we go? We had no church. The church has been destroyed. There were no places in the morgue. The morgue here was full. We had to go to burial. And even the cemeteries were destroyed. So, talk about a cataclysmic and the day after type of event. This was it. Despite that, we were able to refocus, take care of the patients that have come through, manage to go on.
If I may ask, I assume that the passing away of your father probably also had to do with the huge amount of stress that this situation caused.
Oh, definitely. This was quite a shock to him. And one of the words that he used that evening was, your mom and I's sickness have kept you and your family here in Beirut. I looked at him, I said, no, I'm staying here because I want to stay here. And he was like, this is a crazy place and nobody is looking after us. Take your family away. But by then, we had attempted, my wife is Dutch, so we went to Holland for 2 months the following summer. That year we did not travel in 2020 because Corona time. So 2021 we go to Holland and my kids don't want to move there. So we came back. And my kids wanted to stay here in Beirut, so we kept on.
How old are your kids?
My kids are 12 and 15 now. At that time they were much younger. One was 9 and the other was 12.
Do you imagine that when they are at age of university that they will leave the country?
I'll be wherever they are. Yes, if they go to university outside, of course. A few more years to think about it.
It's interesting. I spoke to a few young people and many of them say if they can, they want to leave because they don't like their country, they love their country, but because of the lack of economic security in a sense, and many older people, they want to stay, they love their country, and also what happens if everyone leaves?
Look, that's exactly the conclusion that we came down to. First of all, we don't want to keep the picture clear. The issue here in this country is our corrupt politicians. It's a country under occupation. The occupation is an Iranian occupation that is sanctioned by the European countries as well as the present US administration for various purposes. We don't know what. But yes, If they want to take care of our corrupt politicians, it's very easy. Most of the money that our politicians have is in European banks and US banks.
Maybe in Swiss banks.
Or Swiss banks. It doesn't matter. The bottom line is that if they want to make it difficult for them, they can. But they chose not to. That's the bottom line. And we see the total, you get lip service from all, because we know all of them.
Yeah.
And in touch with all diplomatic circles around. What you hear is one thing, what they're doing is totally different. I mean, being a plastic surgeon with the background, I see everybody and get to know everybody. But I have never seen more double standards than I have seen in my life. Until now. On one hand, you get lip service for them fighting corruption when they are the corruption. And they could do a lot better than that. It's a duality that we have never seen at all, that we're seeing right now. There's a big hypocrisy that is present, and this is a fact. We're not making it up. We thought, if you hear somebody like me speaking, you think of conspiracy theories. But in fact, this is not what we're talking about. We're talking about simple things that could restore people's faith in world leadership. If you allow thugs to run your country, look at Pablo Escobar. Finally, they were all able to get rid of them. But this is the same way, same style, this country's been run since the withdrawal of the Syrian troops. Okay? We were under Syrian occupation before, now we're under Iranian occupation. It's been flipped. In both cases, the common person who went down to the streets and demonstrated against a corrupt politician was never really supported. We're not looking for a support that is a military or active boots. There are a lot of supports that can be done to help people, and none of that was done.
What I've also found interesting in the parallel to Pablo Escobar had some sort of support in the population because he manipulated the population by buying them houses, by giving them gifts and so on.
Sure.
And it's...
How do you think our politicians are running? I mean, this is like you're dealing with the Medellin cartel, but on a different scale. Yeah, there's lots of parallels. The cash economy is glorified. They help their own people. They gave them whatever they wanted. And most of the money that they used were basically from our bank accounts. And they were legitimized by our corrupt politicians who allowed them to do this. So at this point, if you want something, you're not going to go talk to somebody in the government. I mean, case in point, lots of envoys have come. They didn't even invite the foreign minister of Lebanon. Not that he is a person that is going to change things, but still, it's sort of an affront, and a diplomatic affront. So when you have dignitaries, envoys coming to represent different government, and they circumvent that, they're like acknowledging those parallel governments that are basically occupying the country.
It's also really interesting, the unreliable electricity. People in 2019, they went out to protest. It was called a revolution, but in the end, not a lot of things changed.
But there was a reason for that. The reason was simple. Most of these people were put down. They would infiltrate people a la totalitarian regimes where people would infiltrate into these demonstrations, trying to turn them violent when they were peaceful. tried to instigate trouble, tried to get some things going on, some clashes in between the protesters. And they were successful at that. They were successful because they were unrelenting, because they were given all the tools to put down the demonstrations. I'll just take a case in point, the tear gas. At one point in time, our ISF had ran out of tear gas. Then all of a sudden, after the seaport explosion, they had it back. The day after the explosion, there were people that were shot in the eyes with rubber bullets. And those rubber bullets did not come from Timbuktu. They came from European countries. I mean, you look at the canisters, they were made in France.
I also heard many of them were expired, which makes them much stronger.
I dealt with the injuries. I dealt with people that were made, shot at for no goddamn reason. For the average person who doesn't carry a gun and is not going to carry a gun, being faced with armed resistance, what can you do? If you look through history, through what happened in Europe, the fall of the Berlin Wall, had the Stasi's fired and killed more people than they did, it would have been a bloodbath. But there were at least values back then, and people stuck by them. Values and appreciation for human life, which right now in this world of ours, it doesn't exist. Whether in Lebanon or even outside.
Yeah. Coming from Switzerland, Lebanon was in the news a few times recently. The first thing was, of course, the revolution, then mostly the economic crisis and the banks that were being robbed by people that had the right to have their money, of course. And then recently...
They were robbed by several people. They were robbed by the government. They were robbed, and the government was robbed by the militias that were running the government.
Yeah.
It's funny that, we look back, and I go back to 2018. At that point, I remember we were invited to the central bank as alumni from the International College. And the central bank governor back then was saying, okay, I'm not going to give money to the government. I'll simply refuse. Well, that wasn't the case. Could he have refused? Yes, he could have refused. He could have gone public and stopped. Back then, had he done that, yes, the government would have collapsed. Not just the government, a lot of those militias would have collapsed. Because back then, the sanctions on Iran were still in place. Most of these militias that were being protected by the axis of Iran had no income. And this is why our banks were robbed. They delegitimized the exchangers. They brought in new exchangers. They did some things, and it was all under the watch of the central bank governor that just simply stood up. And if he was afraid for his life, he could have fled. There's a lot of things that could have happened to alter this course. But instead, we deeply and slowly into an occupation by militias and by thugs that we have around.
Yeah. Going back to the explosion, what I would be really interested in during that explosion, what came to mind for you? What did you think that was? Because I assume it took a few hours to find out it was from the port, not the bomb.
In my case, We have a WhatsApp group for our class. One of our classmates was at St. George's Hospital. Her father was in the ICU. A little bit over than half an hour from the explosion, she videotapes the fire and she sends it to the group. So we knew there was a big fire at the seaport. And if you look towards the seaport, you could see there was a smoke billowing. So we knew something was going on there. No one expected an explosion. At around 10 to 6, she sends us a message from the hospital that she's leaving the hospital because it's becoming scary. Dad was in the ICU, but his room overlooks the seaport. She said this fire is getting out of hand, and I just started hearing fire trucks coming in. For a good period of time, the firefighters were not called in until the last minute. And when the firefighters came in, as they had unloaded and were opening the doors to the hangar, that's when the explosion happened. But in her case, she walked down to the lobby area of St. George's Hospital, waiting for a taxi to take her home. A concrete bridge fell on her head. She survived for 85 days after the explosion and then passed away. But had she not been in the hospital or within the confines of the hospital, she would have been dead much sooner. The physicians that were there took her immediately down to the OR, resuscitated her, operated on her. She was in the operating room recovering down there until they were able to evacuate the whole hospital. And her family couldn't find her till the next day. That's very difficult. I had many patients come in, they couldn't find their loved ones from the street. They didn't know what hospital they were taken to. And so, survival, you have to survive. You have to find your way to survive. For example, keeping the clinic running, getting things for the clinic, buying consumables for the clinic at a time when medical consumables were very difficult to get by because of Corona and what we were going through. That took a lot of money going out of the box because some hospitals didn't have things. I stocked up on sutures, I stocked up on, and this was even right at the time of 2019, as things were starting to go from bad to worse. So we were able to keep stocked up for 2 years. And actually it did take us a little bit over than 2 years to recover. By the time 2022 rolled in, then we started seeing things back on the market. But everything else had been stocked up much before.
And also the prices that were much higher than before.
Yes, right now the same syringe, for example, that I use every day, you would buy it for probably 99 cents. Now costs about $5-6.
Yeah.
And this is not just due to local problems, this is to worldwide problems. You can see it everywhere. Inflation has hit. So there's more and more unforeseen things that you could imagine but not think they would happen. They did happen. So
very short amount of time.
Not just a short amount, they've been lasting for a long time.
That's fair.
Now we're more than 4 years out since we lost our access to our money, whether we will recover it or not. That's a big question. Yeah, now everything is in cash.
Everything in dollars, of course.
Everything is dollarized,
Yeah.
whether you like it or not. Everything is dollarized. Survival.
Yeah, survival.
Human instinct.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line. I hope that was helpful.
That was really helpful. Thank you very much.